Hey, good morning, Mr. Grider. How are you, sir?
Hey, good morning, Albert. I'm doing great. It's the start of football season, and I know you kind of know where I am. So I'm originally from Seattle, Tacoma area, where I grew up, and so the Seahawks, I guess, are gonna have to do a practice game with the Raiders tonight, right?
Yeah, that we do. We have a game today. It's a first game of preseason.
I
And
know.
it's gonna. I wonder how bittersweet that's gonna be for Pete going back to going to Seattle. I mean, or if I wonder what that's
He
gonna be like.
should get a pretty good, applause and that. I mean, they had a couple of great years, right? That was a pretty good run he had with them, right?
Absolutely. And Gino,
Abs-
and
all of
bittersweet
them
for both of
did,
them.
and absolutely. So it'd be good to see them.
But what's amazing, Mr. Grider, is that
Huh.
starting today, there will be football on every single week all the way through February. How great is
That's
that? And
awesome.
whether college and this, we have 4 days of football because we have games today, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for preseason. I mean,
I love it.
yeah. I mean, get all you want, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
This is
Well,
great.
it,
Yeah,
it is.
well, I think we should probably begin. I think everybody's on. That's going to be
Yeah.
on, and we'll kind of go through this, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's go ahead and let's get going. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending another webinar here with Home Express. So, today we'll be going over valuations and how important it is. Right? We understand that there's some movement in the market. Things are happening. Rates are heating up, and it's important for us to understand property values and some things to look at. And then this is what we're going to get Mr. Grider to tell us a little bit about it. So, as always, thank you for your participation. So today with us, we have Mr. David Grider, who is our Senior Vice President of Sales with Home Express, myself, Albert Martinez, who is your corporate trainer here at Home Express. And then we have our special guest, who's one of our top RSMs here in the company, is Mr. Doug Riley. So with that, I hand it off to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. This is not a typical topic that you'd see coming from a kind of a non-QM lender. I know we have some government products and all, but we're really a non-QM lender and been that way for 10 years. But I was looking at, so many podcasts, so much information coming in that from both sides. One is rates are going to go lower and home prices go up and all these different things. And I got some, hey, the market's going to crash. We got to watch valuations, right? And which one of it's true, right? And there's probably more geographical than anything when you start looking at it. But at Home Express, I'm telling you, we look at each borrower, each property, everything on its own merits. And there's no way in 20, 30 minutes I can go through any type of real in-depth valuations. I look at appraisals, all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to tell you, there is a common sense approach that you can do on looking at valuation and get a reasonable test. And that's where I'm out here to kind of show you is that there can be reasonable tests, and then you can look at items that they get pointed out to you and say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then hopefully our education levels gets there. And maybe I'll take questions you have from a lender's perspective on this as we go through. But I just take a very simple common sense approach. And as I go through this, hopefully that kind of makes sense as I go through it. And again, I've been trained, a long time ago on looking at appraisals, different formats. I've been in charge of REOs before. I'll just throw this tidbit. I was doing charge REOs for a company maybe mid 90s or maybe late 90s. It's the first time I saw an appraisal with a negative value. Think about that one. There is such a thing as a negative value on a home. But let's go through this and we'll kind of just out this at a very high level, kind of looking at it so we can get some reasonable tests going. So Albert, what's our agenda? And I'm hopeful you got a poll for us.
Mr. Grider, before we get into the agenda, how about, considering we're, NFL season, right? And but we had a really, really good NFL draft, right? And a lot
We
of good
did.
candidate. We did a lot of good players came out. So the question for the masses is, which first round draft pick in the 2025 NFL draft is going to have the best season? I mean, I'm a little biased, right? Obviously, I think Gianti will. I think he's going to have a breakout season. But in all truth and honesty, I think Cam Ward, he's just
Well, the
he's a
quarterback
stud.
gets the glory, but man, I'm telling you, I like the play of Travis Hunter, both sides, man, offense and defense. I'm thinking he's going to play both this year too in the NFL, right? Maybe.
It,
It really depends
that's
how they use him, but I think he could be dynamic.
Yeah, that guy's. I mean, they're all studs, right? I mean, that's
They're
why they
they're all
win.
great players, right?
They're all great
Absolutely.
players.
So I'm going with Travis Hunter, but Cam
Travis
Ward, the
Hunter.
quarterback. I'm going for it.
All right. Well, let's see what the masses think. And the masses say Hunter. They say Travis Hunter.
All
He's
right,
gonna he's
hey,
gonna have the best season. So
all
there we go.
right. All right, go
All right.
Jags, right?
There you go.
Yeah, right.
All right,
All
Mr.
right,
Grider,
let's
it's back
let's
to you.
get into the agenda. And there's a lot on this. I tried to kind of abbreviate some to I try to keep these at 20 to 30 minutes max, right? As you go through some valuation perspectives, as you go through all this, and then we're going to hit on some key items, or I would look at on an appraisal all through that, then some other things with Home Express. Now, um, as with any of these podcasts with us, everything's forward facing. We get that and that we understand it. So it's really just like, hey, what evidence, what can we have to kind of do our own research on things? And I think that is what I'm trying to do it. A common sense approach, kind of do some research on yourself. Then you can look at some experts and you can have a pretty good dialogue to feel comfortable on valuations, whether you're buying or you're refinancing, to kind of look at that as it goes forward. So we'll go ahead and just go to the first page here. We'll talk about opinions, right? Um, and again, I love this one because it's I think I've seen this in a lot of different formats, but how your house is looked at by you, yeah, okay, forward facing, yeah, I get that. The buyer, of course, they want to get a lower price and make sure they're getting the best deal possible. Then you got the bank, yeah, okay, great, that's the lender, right? Hey, wait a minute here, I don't know if I want to lend all that LTV on that home. Man, then the two things that really come up, and we're going to look at some studies on this or some data on it, is the insurance evaluator. Yeah, boy, you're going to have bowling ball hail come down on your house, and use a tent, it's going to blow away, right? And then of course, man, your municipality, man, I mean, they're going to tax you, right, on that property. They're going to think. I think it goes up every year. I know there's some where it's every 2 or 3 years, but man, they've really those things can affect the total valuation, what someone's willing to pay for it when they look at total mortgage payment versus just rate or a P&I payment. And that's just a element of it, right? If you go into affordability with inflation that's happened on just normal living standards, man, it's challenging, right? So let's go ahead and look at some data here as we kind of going forward here, Albert. First thing I wanted to point out, kind of everybody kind of knows here what fair market value is, and I'll kind of go to in essence what is on the bottom there, and then just talk briefly on that. Fair market value represents a price determined by the interaction of supply and demand in a free and open market, free from external pressures or undue influence. Then I start looking at that statement. That's great, but when does that ever happen? You start thinking about it. Rates are fluctuating, all the time. Is 3% mortgage rate going to have undue influence on values? I think so. Say if rates went up 10%. What about social media? And, I remember in 21, 22, was it? Man, it's probably more 21. I mean, all the social media, you got to buy now. You're not going to be able to get a house, or all that, FOMO comes out and on both sides, right? But you're trying to put that as this is what we're trying to get to. That's the goal, but you're never really going to be there 100%. You're just trying to get to that just because of all the biases out there, the ones that we develop ourselves, all that stuff that's out there. And you understand everybody's forward facing, right? As a lender, we want more loans. Real estate agent wants to make transactions, right? We want to sell their house as fast as we can at the best price, right? Also find the buyer at the fair market value price they're doing that fits within their budget. All these things go into play, right, as I do it. But that's our goal, right? And so as we go on that, we're going to go forward, kind of with that principle. That's an idea to hit to. probably can get to some, if you looked at a bell curve, right, of what that's trying to be, you're probably one side or the other, but you want to be within 5-10% of what that is. So that's really kind of the goal. Next slide, Albert. Okay, this is just how I look at it, and I kind of go out to on properties, right? I look at two questions on a property. One is marketability, right? Another is it's legal, right? And so there's on that marketability, there's a wide range, right? Of, is it remote or doesn't have much population? There's not a lot of potential buyers for that, right? Or the appeal's not there. It's a little bit lower. We're not saying no to loan, but that would probably take more marketing time. And then the legal aspect, hey, it needs to be legal because all kinds of things can happen with that, right? The value, if it was legal, is this, right? Someone builds a 5-bedroom ADU in their backyard without permits and doing it that way. That's a problem, right? You can see where that's really could have even a negative effect on marketability. I look at the utility of the property. Does it match the residential market? We're a residential lender, so we got to make sure that that kind of fits that. Google the property. I do an overview. Again, this is just me. If I was a consumer, what I look at, right? Matches a residential market. I Google, take an area view. It would surprise you if you do an aerial view, and I've seen this where property comes in great, and they didn't take a picture of the back of the property, which was a lumber yard. It meant lots of equipment and all that. But would that affect marketability? Yeah, we're not saying no to a loan, but at least you know what that is. Would that affect you buying it, right? And then the street view, and I got a clip for you on a street view. Then I checked values on websites and that because I think every consumer buying a property, where do they go to? They go to the internet. I'm not saying which one website to go because they use all kinds of different algorithms, but I look at that value on that on the website for that potential home. Look at any transfers. I look at there's any listings or taken off listing then relisted, and I'm trying to just kind of figure out what it is. And I go right to that neighborhood if that's what I'm considering, right, of that. So I'm doing all this on my own, even while I might have a really good real estate agent with me, right? Because I do believe that if, especially areas you don't know, real estate agents are usually up to date on any of the codes, streets that are going to be put in, improvements, school districts, everything else that might matter to you. They might have, and most do have more expertise on that. And for me, I like someone negotiating than me on it, right? So that's just my preference. And then investment properties, because this is big, is I'm going to talk a little bit that our next webinar is more on the investment properties and see how those going and some of the program enhancements we have on that. But it's clear that it's going to be investment property, those type of things. Those are just a quick view of it, and then we'll go to the next slide, Albert. So once I come with this, and then if you see some of these, what I call kind of red flags, right? Previously listed for sale 12 months. And this is probably more on the refinance side because purchases you usually have a buyer and a seller, and you have real estate agency side. So they're going back and forth. But as you get to refinances, these are ones a little bit more challenging on valuations, right? And you see that. I've seen listing values change. They've listed and taken back off, and they weigh, come up with a business, and then you really look at the utility of the property. When they acquired it, does that make sense that the new value here, if they put this some money into it? All those things that you go into, all you're looking for is a reasonable test, right? To it. And that's kind of like the normal person reasonable test you look at. We'll go next slide. Okay. I think, did we go over this? Okay, current conditions. I think we talked a little bit about this, right? This barbell, right? And this is kind of interesting, as I was looking at some of the slides here, kind of some of the data out there to share with you, is that existing home, there's less transactions in June than they were in 24. There just wasn't that. However, the home sale price went up 435,000. How is that, right? And inventory looks like it went down a little bit as well. Maybe they've taken homes off the market after the spring season. But you think about less transactions, but home values go up. Why? Right. And I got my opinion where it's barbelled, right? The homes over $1 million has increased. I think it's somewhere around 17% from June of last year. Um, and that has affected that median price still going up with the homes in the 500, 600,000 range kind of dwindling. They're still getting the ones at probably 300 range, probably more on the investment side or first time home buyers. Let's look at some other current conditions here. Housing Affordability Index. Now, this one's interesting because all they take into account is the principal and interest, right? And that's something to look at because some of the media today that go on there, if you go to social media, say rates come down and go up. So let's just look at it. Again, this is 2022. Mortgage rate was 5.4 average P&I based on the median price. 1765. Now you're going up all the way at the last section of 2025. It's 2120. So it's gone up, not quite $400. What would you say, 20% somewhere in there, right? And then you got payment percentage of income. There's a lot that goes into that, but this is just data for you. I didn't go back and check the validity of this data, but hey, it's a good point to look at, right? So mortgage rates will have effect on it. If we can get down to 5%, maybe that would affect some valuations of the future. Well, next slide is look at property taxes, right? So this is really the total mortgage payment and affordability, which I think is really causing less transactions today. Where this is the 5 year kind of trend on this, where property taxes over the last 5 years has gone up, not quite 50%. So we'll say like 42 to 44%. So when I look at it, what rates have done over the last 3 years, gone up, housing payment just on the principal and interest, they've gone up 20%. Property tax has gone up 40 some percent. Holy moly. Okay. Well, that's not all. Let's look at something else here. Let's look at insurance. Here's insurance, a trajectory, right? This is from July of 2020 all the way up. You can see where that. Now, again, it's probably more geographical, but throughout the U.S., this has happened. So you got to look at it geographically. Like if you lived in the mountains in California, it's pretty dang expensive, or on the coastlines in Florida, places in Texas where you have more things that can happen through wind or fire, or those type of things. But it really has gone up dramatically over that period of time. So and this is not even including, looking at what's the cost for repairs in a home today, right? Because of inflation, the cost of goods of other things. So I really think that less transaction, that middle section, we need to have something happen to help valuations in certain areas kind of stabilize as we're going forward. We'll go next slide. Supply and demand. And this kind of thing is like, which one's true? Is home values going down? Home values going up? Again, I do think it's more in the micro area, right? And you kind of know your neighborhoods and kind of what's going on. Inventory is coming up, right? Um, but it's not at all-time highs. The ones that you see the big graph on, that was during the GFC. We're not at that point yet, but it does start, and it looks like, something needs to happen, right? So for months of supply on average throughout the US, 4.7, we've still got room, right? Um, and so I don't know. We can just take it from what it is. I do think, the new administration we have in is really pushing hard for rates coming down. I think we saw some rates in the non-QM kind of go down with the 2 years going down. So we'll kind of see how this pans out into this year where it happens, and kind of hope for a good economy, but also that rates kind of stabilize down to maybe hopefully 5%. I am not in favor of rates going to 3%. Right now, it's undue influence on a normal market, and you get these barbells and you cause too much things. It should be in a range and maybe go on that as it goes forward. We'll go next slide, Albert. This is the affordability I was talking about. Why less transaction, why it's barbelled, why that median price is going up. And this is study in US 2024, average household income 77,540. Then you look at the state chart of what you need to buy a house on average, median price. California, Hawaii stands out. I mean, where am I going to live? Right? It's expensive, right? And that affordability it goes right into less transactions. And why I always say these less transactions, why I'm talking about valuation, is that I have some empathy for appraisers out there today. If you're going into a neighborhood and there's not a lot of transactions, man, what do? You still got a job to do the best thing you do, but you may not have immediate comps. And then you have someone going that. So they doing the best job they can for the most part, but at the same time, comps sometimes are hard to find because of less transactions in certain areas. Well, the next slide, Albert. Why are valuations important? So as going through this is like I look at it as such a good service to a borrower, where it's a refinance or purchase, to have something in there that's close to that fair market value, right? Like I say, I think that's a goal to achieve, but there's always influence in one way or other. Some people overpay for home because it fits their family better than, and some have to sell because they need to move to a location, might be a little bit lower, but there's some reasonable test. And you don't want your particular borrower spending that time and money on doing a transaction going forward, and maybe the value might be off some. Or maybe it's better to do that. Another thing too, they appreciate you being knowledgeable, right? Of your markets that you're in, or kind of things, some tips to look at. All right. So my common sense approach, right? And I just kind of go through it again. If I look at it, it's like I get this. Well, I don't know the value because the appraisal's not back yet. Mm, you may not know what that number is going to be, but man, I'm going to tell you, you're going to know within 5-10% of what that value should be. You will, right? Again, you're not going in there. There might be something that's there, but overall, you can actually determine kind of in a common sense approach what the range should be in a certain area. That's all I'm saying. You do the same thing if you were buying the house or going, hey, I'm going to go check out the value of this house for me. I'm going to lend my own money on it. What would you do? Right? You're just not going to rely on an appraiser to do it. You probably need that. And by the way, lenders need that, but you're going to know within a range what it is, right? And that's all the steps that we're trying to put out there to get a range. It's not to go into all the details of use PAP and all the things of the appraiser practice or the AMC, appraiser independence. We get all that. We get all that. But at the same time, you could take the time and know that 5% of transactions that man kind of go off the rails, or why am I getting a condition for? How come you didn't use this comp on the same block on your appraisal? And you're going, that's a pretty good question. If you have a like model match, at least square footage on the same block that's sold in the last 3 or 4 months, and you get an appraisal and they're not using it, why? That's a good question, right? You would ask the same question. So it's a very common sense approach, and you're able to do that. We'll go next slide, Albert. Why Street View matters. And I'm going to tell you, you can look at certain pictures. You go the one on the left, man, looks nice, fix it up. And then if you pull out to a street view, you see probably affects marketability. Now, I don't necessarily say no to any loan, but I mean, some of this would definitely affect marketability. And it's a common sense look. Yeah, all right, probably would. And I've seen some strange ones where no notice that it's right on a freeway, but you're looking at the house, but it's like, you just go, 100 feet, that's a freeway entrance, right? But nothing mentioned on it. Now, those are anomalies, right? I think over 90% are done, and it comes in at this, where we're looking at, especially if we're going forward with transactions that you're looking at that may not be on there and things that come up, that in the future you can just do this type of thing and kind of look at sales in your neighborhood, those type of things you're looking at to be more educated for your borrowers. Well, the next slide. Items to review. Hey, Albert, I think it is time for another poll, right?
Mr. Grider, I couldn't
I
agree
think
with
it
you
is.
more. So, we've talked about a lot of things, right? We brought up, some really, really good issues, but we kind of want to know what are some of our, some of the people that are attending. We kind of want to know what it is that they're dealing with, right? So, what is the biggest challenge that you currently face with appraisals? Is it turnaround times? Is it valuation disputes? Is it communication with the appraisers? Or is it just understanding the appraisal report, right? So these are just some, something that we want to know, right? I mean, we've talked about affordability, we've talked about, looking at this and, looking at the comps and so on, right? But, what's affecting you? So tell us a little bit through the poll. What do you think, Mr. Grider?
I don't know. I mean, this is tough. One is the communication with appraisers. Probably not, because you're going to go. Usually, they should be working through the AMC with that. Um, I would say valuations when they get disputed, of why, right? And then you're going back and forth. And I've had it on both sides. One was we think the value of the property as a lender is probably more it is because they got better comps. And then you go to dispute with AMC and the appraiser says no. And likewise, hey, we don't think the value's there. Can you get me some other comps? And you just don't get anything. So I think that the biggest pain point would be on that, 2 to 4% on valuation
And
disputes.
you are correct. Valuation disputes. That is the main pain point. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. And understanding appraisal reports is great, but that's what we have up next. And we're not, again, this is not going through, this is, the appraisers have to spend a lot of time training to go through what they do, right? To be licensed and do all that. This training is just to look at sections of it on a common sense approach, right? So you can review and say, maybe that's it. What are they looking at, and what are the sections to look at? And I'm going to have Mr. Doug Riley kind of help us with that, how he looks at it and how his team looks at appraisals if they come into some questions on it. So Doug, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I'm gonna give you guys my quick review of an appraisal. How do I look at an appraisal when it comes in? Just like a quick 3-minute review of an appraisal to identify whether or not we've got some issues that are going to interfere with the transaction, things that we might need to address, or identify if we just need to dig in deeper to figure out if there are issues, or does this look good and we can just move on. So a lot of it is just doing what Dave's been talking about so far, but we're going to do it in live time on a real appraisal. So if we can jump to the next slide, Albert, we'll dig into it. So first thing I'm looking at, page one of the appraisal, what type of transaction are we dealing with here? Is this a refinance or purchase? If it's a refinance, I'm going up to the top there, owner of public record. Does my borrower own the home? Right? Common sense type stuff. If it's a purchase transaction, we're going down to the bottom left. I want to know what the contract sales price is, just because I want to make sure it appraised for the sales price or more, right? And over to the right of that, I want to see if this is a purchase, does the seller own the property? That yes or no box to your right. uh, I want to look at the occupant who's living in this home. If we're doing an owner-occupied transaction, is it occupied by our owner? If we're doing a non-owner occupied, is it tenant occupied? If we're doing non-owner occupied and it's vacant, why? We're going to probably want to dig into that. To your right-hand side, you see the homeowners association dues highlighted, and that's just highlighted because I'm looking at that because I want to see, do we have an expense in the monthly payment that isn't being considered in the debt ratio, right? So I'm just going to check the PITIA. And as Dave mentioned a little earlier, you see the box yes and no highlighted on the right-hand side of the page. There is the subject property currently offered for sale, or has it been offered for sale in the last 12 months? So if we've got a purchase transaction and it's transferred in the last 12 months, then we've got some seasoning guidelines. And if it's non-owner occupied and it's recently listed, then we're going to want to dig into that. So let's jump to the next page. Still page one of the appraisal, next page on the slide. So next I'm going to look at the neighborhood characteristics. This is a perfect example of why this one is a rural. So with Home Express, We will take a look at this property and the surrounding area, and if it looks like it has suburban characteristics, there's shopping nearby, a Walmart down the street, then we might upgrade this to suburban with rural characteristics, and you won't have an LTV reduction. If it truly is rural, then we're going to want to make sure that we are within the guidelines on the loan to value. I'm going to look at the one unit housing trends. And this is a good example of really, you do not have to be a master in appraisal in order to review an appraisal and do something of value to help the transaction and make sure things go smoothly. So, if property values are increasing, common sense says that's probably a good thing, right? If values are stable, probably also a good thing. If they're declining, we probably want to ask some questions. You want to call your account exec and dig into that because that could be an issue. If you have marketing time that is over 6 months, we're going to want to dig into that. Next, Dave hit on this already, legal use. Oh, sorry, Albert. Let's go back to that prior slide. Just next section below is what I'm referring to there. So zoning compliance, do we have legal use, right? And also highest and best use. So we need to check that as well. And we need legal use and we need a yes on highest and best use. I'll look at utilities. Good example on this one. We have a private well and a septic tank. So if we have a purchase transaction, it's possible that we're going to have a point of sale inspection. We might need a water test. Has the septic tank been cleaned out recently? Does the local municipality have a requirement on this? These things can come up. And then below that, are there any physical deficiencies or adverse conditions that affect the livability, soundness, or structural integrity of the property? If that box is checked yes, then we are going to have some issues and we're going to want to try to address those. And the last line you have on there, Dave addressed this one as well. Does the property conform to the neighborhood? Functional utility, right? We want to see a yes on that as well. So if we can jump to the next slide, we'll get into page 2 of the appraisal, the comparable properties. So we're going to find out here, is this property marketable, right? Do we have similar sales that are being used in order to estimate the value of this property? And really, almost everything on this page can be significant. I've highlighted some things that I want to just address in our time today. You see right off the bat, proximity to the subject. Generally, we want to see that we're within a mile for the comparable sales. We want properties that are in the immediate neighborhood. And this is well over the 1 mile. I already know why, right? This is a rural property, so we're going to see that kind of thing, and we want to make sure that the best comparable properties were used, and the fact that it's over a mile might not be a problem. I've also highlighted date of sale. It's also a good indicator of marketability. If we're not seeing any transfers in the last 12 months that are similar to our property, if we have to go beyond 12 months, why? Is it a marketability issue? It might not be. It may, right? It could be transaction volume, like Dave was already highlighting. I also have single line item adjustments highlighted here just because you see some really big ones. And like we have $150,930 on one of our line items here. That's like 20% of the appraised value of this property. So that's pretty unusual and tells me that we might not have any similar properties in the neighborhood, which means there might not be a demand for properties like this. So these kind of things give us an indication of what we're dealing with. At the bottom, you see net and gross adjustments. I'm always looking at that. I want to see that net's within 15%. I want to see gross is within 30. Doesn't mean they have to be. It's just a good guideline. And here we have adjustments that are in the 50s. So again, we probably have a pretty unique property here. And at the bottom of this page, you're always going to want to check, is this appraisal as is, or are we subject to repairs? Are we going to have a re-inspection after doing some work? Or is it subject to completion, right? Because we have a new construction property. Then the appraised value, does this work for our deal? And the date, appraisals need to be within 120 days. Sometimes we get transfers, so I'm always keeping a close eye on that as well. And if you want to jump to the next page, Albert, we'll look at some pictures. So right off the bat, okay, now I understand those comparable properties we were looking at and the adjustments we were seeing, this is definitely a unique property. This is a barn dominium. So you're going to identify things like this hopefully prior to a submission and prior to ordering an appraisal. Um, We've got a unique property, in this case, a barn dominium. And in order to lend on a barn dominium, you're going to need to get an exception, and that is not going to be easy to obtain. If we can jump to the next slide, Albert. Um, so these are the comparable properties. If you ever are going to get an exception on a property like this, we're going to want to see that there are comparables. And these are barn dominiums too. So I've seen a lot of barn dominium properties, and generally, it is very, very difficult to find other barn dominiums in the surrounding area. We had some pretty significant distance, but comps were all within 12 months, and they are barn dominiums. The only thing I see here is that they look quite a bit superior to our subject property. So are they really a good indication of value for us? So I think you can go as deep as you want to on an appraisal. When I'm looking at an appraisal, I want to get through it pretty quick just to identify, are we okay? Can I move on? Are there just real minor issues that I don't need to worry about? Or do I have potential deal killers that we need to jump on real quickly to make sure that we are doing the right thing to get this deal done, to solve problems and make sure you guys look good in front of your clients? So that's all I've got, Dave, and I will
Wow.
turn it back to you.
It's a real interesting appraisal you have there, right? That you shared with
Right?
us. So thanks for sharing that with us. Barndominiums are, they've been around for quite a while now. I see them in Texas quite a bit, but they are challenging. Not everybody wants to buy a barndominium, right? Even though some I've looked at are just fantastic, right? Uh, Decked out, really, really nice homes. As we go through this, I'm just going to kind of wrap it up here as we, before we get some question. But hey, where do you find Home Express, right? We're on Loan Sifter and Lender Price, right? Also our portal, you can do that. Other programs we've come out to this year is non-delegated correspondent. So if you're interested in that, love to have a conversation with you. We have no carve outs. What we do on the wholesale side, we do on the non-del side. So we have no carve outs. We're here. We look at each deal on its own merits. Like I've said earlier, even on these things, you have access to our AE and our scenario desk for these different properties that may come up. Or, hey, what do you think? Hey, I'm trying to get this deal done, where it's income, property later, that we could probably give you an answer pretty quick. And I think as we go forward, and we've probably seen this, I mean, properties could be a big issue going forward just because of limited transactions or uniqueness to it, or just the way it's going, right? You have the high-rise condos in Florida, right? You even have some condo issues in California, some new regulations, right? Or Hawaii. But we're looking at each deal on its own merits, and that gives us the flexibility to make exceptions for you when it's warranted, and those type of things. So we're here to help you close more loans. And we'll just keep on going. Maybe we can get to the questions phase here, Albert, and I can hopefully answer any questions they have. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on properties or valuations. It could be on any type of programs or industry, right?
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mr. Greider. We do have a question from Robert Rodriguez with C2 Financial, and he's just asking, is this being recorded? Can you please send me the link to the recording? And he put in his email address.
Yes. Everybody that registered for the webinar gets a copy of the deck, right? So, and then it goes on YouTube, does it? Right?
Yes, it
I
does.
guess,
As
right?
well as our
So,
website. As well as our website. Yes, sir. We post it. We make sure you can get a hold of it.
okay, good.
Awesome. Mr. Greider, something that I noticed, and I think it would be important to note, as Doug was talking about, different aspects of the appraisal, how important do you think it is for them to also review the condition of not only the property, but also what the comparables, the
Oh,
condition that is marked?
absolutely. Absolutely, that could be doing. It's like, some mark C4 or C2, right, as you're going through that. And that does affect things. So that is important as well. As I'm going through it, one thing is I kind of do what Doug does as well. There's certain sections I look at, but I'm going to tell you, pictures tell 1,000 words. I mean, just to, so if you did anything, you go look at the pictures of her home and the pictures of the comparables tells you a lot just by looking at it, right? And that'll also give you a feeling of that. What you don't know is that you need to read the appraisal report is the inside. It could have been totally rehabbed, all updated kitchen appliances, new all that stuff, new carpeting, all that stuff that may not be reflected in the other ones, right? And so that's what you're looking for. Does that make sense? And that would improve the marketability and value of that home, having significant upgrades versus a comparable if you're just looking at the outside. But you actually get pictures of inside on appraisal as well. So you kind of have the feeling of that.
It's as you were mentioning that a question did come in is how do you determine if the collateral is marketable and legal?
Man, this is your judgment call, all right? And this is all opinion based, and this is just me talking how I look at it. I go to this in lending, right? What it is, I have a normal person guideline, right? So you have a normal person, just your average, Jane, Joe, whatever you want to call it. Would they buy this property, right? Would they occupy this property, right? If the answer is a big percentage, yes, it's probably marketable. If you're going, yeah, I think less people would go to this property because of the functions, right? With me, how many people want 10 acres? I don't think a lot do. Right. That's why you see some of the guidelines restrict that, especially over because you got to upkeep that. You got to do everything with that property, responsible for it. So most people don't want that. So that marketability is a little bit different, right? Um, and so you kind of look at it, you look at where the street is at, how busy the road is. I think most normal people want to have a safe environment home for their family, uh, with reasonable quietness and that kind of stuff. I know it's impossible in big cities necessary for that, but there's segments of it as you go through. And so you really just do analysis. I look at it as myself as like, how do I look at myself? Would I live? It doesn't matter on the size or that kind of stuff, but man, you just kind of look at that. Yeah, that's a reasonable test. That's why I say this is all opinion. Even the praise report on there, it is my opinion. They're giving your opinion. And so it's more of just kind of just going through it, right? Just going through and looking at it. Is it reasonable as to a normal person without undue influence at all, right?
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mr. Greider. The next question that we have is says, why is it important to check the value for any listings or transfers in the last 12 months?
Great question, right? And this is probably on both sides, right, of a purchase and a refinance. So I'll do the purchase first, right? So I look at purchases on that. If it was for sale, let's say for $1 million a year ago, and then it goes off the market, goes back on the market for 1.2 million, right? Then it goes, hey, I'm doing listing 1.1 million. Then all of a sudden it pops up, hey, I'm listing the property for 1.4 million. I just scratch my head at that and look at. I couldn't sell it for 1 million, but now I'm listing it for 1.4 million. Does that make sense? So it's just a common sense. What happened? And I'm not saying no to it. Maybe something drastically happened. Hey, it was listed here. They decided to take it off. They rehabbed all these different things, put a new pool in, did all these things. Okay, that makes sense. I'm just saying that's not common for property to be listed at a certain price that go up and down and then all of a sudden it ends. So I'm just looking at does that seem reasonable? So it's a reasonable test. And I've seen so you just don't want to be caught. It's like why couldn't a home sell for 1 million on the market for 4 months and now someone's buying it for 2 million? That's pretty tough to explain. Now, every loan in non-QM's got to pass due diligence, right? Every single one. Anybody looking at that's going to say that's strange. We're going to have to explain that. So you're just looking at stuff down the road that might explain. Now, refinance is what's their intent? Is their intent to sell the house and move, or did they set a valuation? Because if they set a valuation out there on the property, and I'll just throw out 300,000, said list for 300,000, took it off 2 months ago, and you get appraisal in for 350, what's the most reasonable valuation of that property when values aren't going up in that immediate neighborhood? Couldn't sell for 300,000, but it's worth 350. You have to explain that. those are the things that you kind of look at. So you're jumping ahead of it. So if that does happen, at least you can explain it, or at least kind of point out, hey, that doesn't seem common, right? Most homes don't do that. If I put my house for sale today for $1 million, right, and then take it off, hey, I want to refinance. Like, here's my appraisal at a million five. Man, it doesn't seem right. So that's all you do is it's very just a common sense approach. That's why I look at that. And I've seen a lot, not a lot. I've seen a few times when it looks that way, and it's like, man, I just seem that's not normal.
Thank you for that. And and as you're mentioning these things, Mr. Grider, a question did pop in, and it makes great. And I think it's a great question. But on a recently rehab property, how do you determine the excessive valuation?
Right. So we our approach on this on is value is value. Let's go to the side. Now, how do you look at and what LTV you do? Because we're trying to say through all the sources we have, and we do a waterfall of reviews, right? So we can look at and determine the comps in the area and all that. But if they purchase it and rehab it, I mean, it should not be tremendously worth a lot more than what they purchased it for and what they put into the property. They probably gained some, right? And they could, but you got to look at it from the angle. So we don't really cut back and say, hey, we're going to use a purchase price on this refinance, right? Because it's usually typically that's an investment property. They're looking at deals. Hey, if I buy this property here, I know I got to do the new roof, new appliances, new flooring, new fixtures in all the bathrooms. They're doing all this stuff. Then they come out to it to get to what a mark would be for that. And they've gained some on it, right? Because of their labor, time, and everything they put into it. But how much is that? You just got to look at the comps. Does that make sense, right? And then how much we lend on it really kind of depend on, we're not big on giving cash out way over what they purchased it for and what improvements they put into it. So those are more that typically come to us. They just want to be whole, maybe move on to the next. But we'll definitely look at those, and they typically, if the value holds, they get a great product and rate because LTV could be 65 that we're lending on, but just based on that transaction, how they got it, and the cash out function more limited to what they put into it. Uh, Not excessive over that. But if it's over 6 months, we can have a little more flexibility on it.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mr. Grider. And that's all the questions that we have for today. And I think we want to thank everyone again for attending. And obviously we'll continue to have these and provide you with some valuable information. But if you have any closing words, Mr. Grider, so we can let everyone go.
No, and just thank you for participating. It's I hope everybody has so far a decent year. I know transactions are lower, but I'm looking forward. I actually think the rates will eventually start coming down, which is that what the media will take off, housing's more affordable. I still think we got issues with taxes and insurance to make it more affordable. And again, this is just a high overview of simplistic, common sense approach to look at valuations going forward, right, on these. And again, these are kind of limited, probably a small percentage you deal with because most of the time they come through fine. But how do you deal with that is important. We have experienced account executives to be able to walk you through this, and we have resources you can talk to see if something does come up, we'll work with you on that. So thank you guys very much.
Doug, any closing words?
Just thanks to everybody for attending, and we are here to help you guys with anything you have.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.